Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive. We're going to be tackling something that I think a lot of us have probably encountered in our lives. We're talking about emotional immaturity versus narcissism.
Yeah, definitely.
You've given us some really interesting stuff to work with today.
Hmm?
So I think just jumping right in, these terms sometimes get used interchangeably, but it seems like there are some pretty important distinctions.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a bit of a blurry line at times, but there are distinctions. And by the end of this, you'll be able to spot the red flags and understand what's really going on underneath.
Absolutely. And I feel like these are things that can really impact any type of relationship, personal, professional, family, friends. So I think getting a handle on the nuances here is going to be super valuable for everyone listening.
For sure.
Okay, so let's dive right in. When I think of emotional immaturity, I kind of picture like those classic teenage struggles, like, the mood swings, the drama, always making it about me, needing constant reassurance. Would you say that's a fair starting point?
It is. Think of it as someone who's emotionally stuck in adolescence.
Ah, okay.
That lack of development in emotional regulation, self-awareness, all of that. And we all start there, obviously. But the issue is when someone kind of stays fixed in that pattern as they get older.
Right. I guess we've all known that friend, right? Yeah. The one who throws a fit if things don't go their way.
Yeah.
Or always has to be the victim. Could that be a sign of emotional immaturity?
Absolutely. Difficulty accepting responsibility,
Yeah.
empathizing with others, setting healthy boundaries, things like that.
Right.
And actually, in one of the studies that you provided, they linked insecure attachment styles
Interesting.
to later difficulty with emotional regulation.
Wow. So it can really stem back to those early childhood experiences.
It can, yeah.
That's pretty fascinating. So it's not just about acting childish. There can be some deeper psychological roots to emotional immaturity. Now, flipping over to narcissism, I feel like we all have that image in our minds of the classic narcissist, right? Vain, self-obsessed, always hungry for attention and admiration.
Right. That's the stereotype. And it's not entirely inaccurate, but narcissism runs much deeper than just vanity. It's really rooted in this sense of self-importance and a lack of empathy. They genuinely believe they're superior to others and deserve special treatment regardless of what they've actually accomplished.
Wow. Yeah. That's a little bit more intense than just being, vain.
Yeah.
I remember one of the articles that mentioned the, what was it called? The narcissist's prayer.
Oh, yeah.
And it was kind of chilling because it so perfectly captured that sense of entitlement and lack of accountability.
Oh, yeah, that didn't happen prayer.
Yes, that's it.
That's a big one.
That didn't happen.
Yeah.
It's scary to think how that would play out in a relationship.
Oh, it can be very damaging, especially because of that lack of empathy. It's hard to connect on a genuine emotional level. Narcissists often use people to fulfill their own needs. One of your sources talked about this idea of narcissistic supply. The constant need for validation and admiration to prop up their fragile ego.
Right. It's not just about being selfish. It's using others to regulate your own emotions and self-worth. So we've got emotional immaturity, which might come from those early experiences and trouble regulating your emotions. And then narcissism, which is more about a deep-seated sense of superiority and lack of empathy.
Yeah.
But are these two totally separate things, or could there be a link between them?
That's where it gets really interesting. While they're distinct concepts, research suggests that emotional immaturity could actually be a precursor to narcissism.
Hold on, a precursor. How does that work?
Imagine a child growing up in an environment where their emotional needs are constantly ignored or dismissed. They might suppress their emotions, become dependent on external validation, and develop a sense of entitlement.
Oh, so as a coping mechanism. To protect themselves.
Right.
Okay.
And then, tying back to attachment theory, it's not surprising that insecure attachment styles, particularly anxious avoidant types, might be susceptible to developing those narcissistic tendencies later on.
Wow, so it really does all connect. That's a fascinating insight. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, this person is emotionally immature or this person is a narcissist, because there's this whole spectrum and these underlying psychological factors that we have to consider.
Exactly. And understanding those nuances is crucial for navigating relationships with a little more awareness and compassion.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've laid the groundwork, we've defined these terms, we've explored this potential link between them. But now, how does all of this actually play out in real-life relationships? Like, what's the difference in impact?
That's a great question. Because they both can leave a mark on relationships, but in very different ways.
Okay, I'm ready to hear more about that.
Let's start with emotional immaturity. Let's say you're trying to build a relationship with someone who struggles to regulate their emotions. So one day they might be showering you with affection, and the next day they're distant and withdrawn.
Oh, I can see how that would be so frustrating. You're constantly walking on eggshells. You never know what version of that person you're going to get.
Exactly. And because they lack those emotional regulation skills, they might overreact, they have difficulty communicating their needs, or they resort to blaming others when things go wrong.
So it's not that they're intentionally trying to hurt you. It's just that they lack the skills and the self-awareness to navigate a mature relationship.
Precisely. And in some cases, that's why there's hope for growth, because with the right support, they can learn those skills, right?
Okay,
But it takes a willingness to look inward.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about with someone who exhibits more narcissistic tendencies? How does that typically play out?
Well, with narcissism, it's a little more insidious. Remember, they need that admiration, that sense of superiority. So they might initially charm you, make you feel like you're the center of their world.
Oh, the love bombing.
Exactly. But that idealization phase doesn't last forever. Once they feel like they've secured you, the mask starts to slip, and their true nature starts to peek through.
Oh, so that's when the devaluation begins.
Exactly. They might become critical, dismissive, or they start to gaslight you, make you question your own sanity.
I've heard that term gaslighting thrown around a lot, but can you explain what that actually means in this context?
Sure. Gaslighting is a form of manipulation where they twist the truth to make you doubt your own memories and experiences.
Okay.
So, like, denying they said something hurtful even though you remember it clearly, or accusing you of being too sensitive when you express your feelings.
Oh, wow, that's got to be so damaging to someone's self-esteem. You're chipping away at their reality.
It is, and it can be very difficult to break free from that cycle. They need to maintain control, and they'll use whatever tactics they can to do so.
So with emotional immaturity, it sounds like the damage is more unintentional. It's from that lack of skill. But with narcissism, there's an element of deliberate manipulation and control.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And going back to what we talked about with those insecure attachment styles and how those early experiences can really shape our development, imagine someone with an anxious avoidant attachment style.
Yeah.
They crave intimacy, but they're also terrified of vulnerability and rejection.
Oh, I can see how that would be a recipe for problems in a relationship.
Absolutely. And for some people, those deep-seated fears can lead to narcissistic traits as a way to protect themselves from getting hurt.
So they're building up this facade of grandiosity and invulnerability as a way to mask their own pain and avoid those difficult emotions.
Exactly. And that might manifest as them being hyper-focused on success or status, external validation. They're trying to overcompensate for those feelings of inadequacy.
Wow, that's a powerful insight. It makes you realize that there's often so much more going on beneath the surface.
Absolutely.
And it really highlights the need for empathy and understanding.
I agree.
So, can people with these traits actually change? Is there hope for someone who might exhibit either emotional immaturity or narcissistic tendencies to actually grow and evolve?
That's the million-dollar question. And like most things in life, the answer is complicated. There's a lot of nuance to it.
Yeah.
You know, what makes a personality pattern something that's fixed versus something that can be molded? And I think there's definitely potential, but different factors depending on which one we're talking about.
Okay. So, with emotional immaturity, I feel like if it's just a matter of someone lacking certain skills or awareness, there's more room for improvement.
Yeah, for sure.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah. The core issue is a lack of developed emotional intelligence.
Oh.
So they may not know how to effectively regulate their emotions, communicate their needs assertively, or take responsibility for their actions.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things.
So in those cases, could therapy be beneficial?
Yeah.
Like, could that be the key to unlocking that growth potential?
Definitely. Therapy can provide that safe space for people to explore the root causes of their emotional immaturity.
Yeah.
You know, develop better coping mechanisms.
Right.
Learn those communication skills that might be missing.
So it's like they're given the tools to rewire those ingrained patterns.
Exactly.
That's encouraging to hear. But what about narcissism? I mean, for someone who so locked into their sense of superiority and that lack of empathy, is there any hope for them?
That's where it gets a lot trickier. Because narcissism is characterized by this really rigid defense mechanism. It's like a protective shell they've built around themselves.
Right, to avoid that vulnerability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the truth is, many narcissists never seek help or even acknowledge they have a problem. They blame others for their difficulties.
Yeah, makes sense.
Or they just don't see a need to change.
But let's say, hypothetically, a narcissist does recognize that they need help. Maybe their relationships are falling apart, or they're facing consequences for their actions. What would that journey towards change look like?
It is a long and arduous process.
Okay.
It requires a level of self-awareness that most narcissists just don't have. Therapy would probably focus on helping them develop empathy, challenging their distorted self-image, and learning to take responsibility.
Wow. So it's not just about learning new skills. It's about like a total worldview shift.
Exactly. It's a complete transformation of how they relate to others.
Right.
And that doesn't happen quickly. You know, it takes years of work, and there are no guarantees.
So while there's always hope, it really hinges on the individual's willingness to do that really deep work and commit to that personal growth.
Absolutely. And this kind of brings us back to that self-awareness piece we talked about earlier. You know, understanding those dynamics in our own relationships is key.
This has definitely given me a lot to think about. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on the people in my life and how I interact with them.
That's great to hear, because knowledge is power. The more you understand these traits, the better equipped you'll be to navigate those challenges that come up in any relationship.
It's like you've given us a secret decoder ring to understand the hidden meanings behind certain behavior.
I love that.
But awareness is only the first step, right?
Yeah.
It's what we do with that knowledge that really matters.
Absolutely. Can people change? Is there potential for change?
Yeah. Given everything we've talked about, I mean, is there actually hope for someone who exhibits these traits, either emotional immaturity or narcissistic tendencies? Can they actually grow and evolve?
You know, it's the big question. And it's not a simple answer.
Right.
You know, there are a lot of factors, I think, with emotional immaturity, you know, where it's more about a lack of skills or awareness. There's probably more room for improvement there.
Okay. So you would agree with that there's more potential there because it's more of a skill deficit as opposed to a...
Yeah. It comes down to emotional intelligence. You know, they might not know how to regulate their emotions.
Right.
They don't know how to communicate their needs effectively.
Yeah.
They don't take ownership of their actions. So therapy can be incredibly beneficial.
So with the right support and guidance, they can develop those skills.
Yeah. It gives them that safe space to explore what's at the root of it all.
So it's like rewiring those patterns.
Yeah.
That's really encouraging to hear.
It is.
But then when we talk about narcissism, that feels a lot more,
I
don't know, trickier, I guess.
Way trickier.
Because there's that deep-seated...
It's a very rigid defense mechanism that they've built up over time.
Right. To avoid that vulnerability.
Exactly. And honestly, a lot of narcissists, they never seek help.
They don't even see it as a problem.
Right. They might blame everyone else, or they just truly believe there's nothing to change.
But let's say, for the sake of argument, that a narcissist does come to that realization that they need help, that their behavior is causing problems in their life. What would that process even look like? What would that journey towards change look like for them?
I mean, it's a long and it's a hard road.
Okay.
It takes, you know, a lot of self-awareness. And honestly, most narcissists just, they don't have that. But, you know, if they were to go to therapy, it would focus on things like developing empathy, challenging that distorted self-image, and learning to take responsibility for their actions.
So it's like, I mean, we were saying before, it's not just about learning a new skill. It's
a whole
complete
worldview shift. Yeah. And that doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
You know, years of work, and even then, no guarantees.
So it sounds like, I mean, while there's always that possibility for change, it really does come down to the individual and their willingness to dig deep and do that hard work.
Exactly. And it goes back to what we were talking about before, that self-awareness piece, right? Being able to recognize patterns in our own lives.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
This has definitely given me a lot to think about in my own life and my own relationships. It's almost like you've given us a new lens to view the people in our lives.
I think that's a great way to put it. You know, knowledge is power. And the more we understand about these complex things, the better we can navigate all the challenges that, you know, inevitably come up in relationships.
It's like we have this secret decoder ring now to understand those hidden meanings behind certain behaviors. But just being aware isn't enough, right? It's about how we use that knowledge that really matters.
100%.
Well, this has been such an incredible conversation. I feel like we've covered so much ground. As we wrap up, do you have any final words of wisdom to share with everyone listening?
If you take one thing away from this, remember this. Trust your gut. If you're feeling constantly drained or manipulated or disrespected, that's a problem. You know, you deserve to be treated with kindness and respect and empathy. You have the power to choose who you let into your life.
Right.
And, how much you invest in those relationships.
I love that. Such an empowering message to end on. Thank you so much for all of this today. It's been truly enlightening.
My pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time. Keep those minds curious.